Okay, so it is Wednesday, February 11th, 2026. And if you've been watching the markets or, just scrolling through your terminal this morning, you've definitely seen the numbers from Cloudflare.
Mm.
They reported their Q4 2025 earnings yesterday. The stock is reacting, but we are not here to just read the ticker tape.
No, absolutely not. Because the ticker doesn't tell you why.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't explain how a company that started out as, let's be honest, a glorified firewall is suddenly signing $40 million contracts.
That is the number that just jumped out at me. We are going to get into the weeds on the financials, revenue, margins, all of it. But the narrative Matthew Prince was spinning on that call, it felt less like a quarterly report and more like, I don't know, a warning shot to the entire industry.
Yeah,
They're calling it the agentic internet.
it's a bold rebrand. Essentially, they are betting the farm that the primary user of the internet in 2026 isn't you or me anymore.
Software.
It's software, exactly.
Which, okay, sounds like standard tech futurism until you actually look at the traffic volume they're reporting. So here's the plan for this deep dive. We're going to dissect the Q4 numbers, see if this growth is real or just, AI hype. We have to talk about this massive pivot to enterprise sales. They are not selling $20 subscriptions anymore.
Yeah.
And I want to push back a little on this idea of strategic neutrality they keep bringing up. Is being the Switzerland of AI a real defensible moat? Or are they just waiting to get crushed by the hyperscalers?
That is the core conflict, isn't it? Can you survive as the connectivity layer when Amazon, Google, and Microsoft own all the compute?
Let's find out.
Let's do it.
All right, so let's start with the headline numbers. The market seems relieved, to say the least.
Relieved is an understatement. Revenue for Q4 came in at $614.5 million.
Wow.
It's up 34% year over year. But the metric that really matters here is the acceleration.
Yeah.
This is the third quarter in a row that the growth rate has actually picked up.
Which is so rare for a company at that kind of revenue scale. I mean, usually the law of large numbers kicks in and growth starts to decay.
Exactly. They're defying gravity a little bit. They're guiding for nearly $2.8 billion in revenue for 2026.
Okay.
That puts them in a completely different weight class than they were just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But that growth, it isn't coming from where it used to.
Right. This is the big fish strategy. I remember just a few years ago, the whole bear case on Cloudflare was, sure, they have a lot of customers, but they don't pay enough. It was a volume game.
That narrative is, it's effectively dead.
Mm-hmm.
Just look at the customer segmentation. They now have 269 customers paying them more than $1 million a year.
269.
And that count is up 55% year over year.
That's incredible. To put that in perspective, if you go back to, mid-2023, they had fewer than 100 of those customers total.
Right.
Now they're adding that many in a single year.
It is a total metamorphosis of their sales motion.
Yeah.
And it all culminated in this record-breaking deal they just announced. A single contract with an annual contract value, an ACV of $42.5 million.
$42.5 million a year.
A year.
I mean, that is Salesforce money. That's Oracle money. That isn't make my website load faster money anymore. What on earth are they actually selling for that price?
And that's the key question, right? When you sign a deal that size, you're not just buying a product, you are re-platforming your entire network. That customer is most likely ripping out legacy hardware. They're canceling contracts with a dozen other vendors for VPNs, firewalls, load balancers, and they're consolidating everything onto Cloudflare.
So it's really a big vendor consolidation play.
In part, yeah. The CFO, Thomas Seifert, he noted that sales productivity is at an all-time high, even better than the 2021 peak. So they figured out how to sell these huge, complex deals. But there's a new driver in these contracts. And well, that brings us right back to the agentic theme.
Okay, let's unpack this agentic internet concept. Because agents is the buzzword of 2026. Everyone's saying it. But Prince was arguing this actually shifts the fundamental physics of web traffic.
Yeah, think about the unit economics of a human user versus an AI agent. As a human, you have physical limits. You sleep, you eat.
You get bored.
You get bored. You might click a few hundred links a day if you're extremely online.
I try to keep it under 1,000, personally.
An AI agent, though, a piece of software tasked with, say, plan my vacation or monitor global supply chain prices, it doesn't have those limits. It can send thousands of requests per second. And Prince dropped this stat that in January 2026 alone, the weekly requests from AI agents on their network just doubled.
Doubled in 1 month.
In 1 month, yes. And that matters because Cloudflare charges for usage, for requests, for processing, for security checks. So if the internet is transitioning from humans browsing to bots executing tasks, the volume of traffic doesn't just grow linearly, it grows exponentially.
Okay, but isn't that traffic lower quality? A bot isn't buying shoes, it's just looking at them.
See, that's the old way of thinking. In the agentic era, the bot is buying the shoes, or at the very least, it's executing the transaction. And because Cloudflare sits in front of something like 20% of the entire web, they become the toll road. If an agent from OpenAI or Anthropic wants to access a site, it has to pass through their network.
So they're betting on volume. But here's my concern with that. The infrastructure to service that kind of volume is wildly expensive. We all know the hyperscalers, AWS, Azure, Google, are spending hundreds of billions on GPUs and data centers. Cloudflare isn't spending that kind of money.
No.
How can they possibly compete on performance if they aren't matching the CapEx spend?
This is where we have to get a little technical because their whole David versus Goliath story relies on architecture, not just on spending. The hyperscalers, they generally operate on a virtual machine or VM or maybe a container model. When you rent space on AWS, you're reserving a chunk of a server, and you pay for that capacity whether you use it or not.
Right? It's like renting a hotel room. You pay for the whole night, even if you're only there for an hour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cloudflare uses what they call an isolate model. It's a much lighter weight form of virtualization. They can spin up a computing environment in milliseconds, run a tiny snippet of code, and then shut it right back down. They aren't renting you the room, they're renting you the bed for the exact number of seconds you're sleeping in it.
So they can just cram more work onto the same piece of hardware.
They claim about 10 times the efficiency per GPU compared to a standard hyperscaler setup. And that lets them run AI inference workloads, the actual thinking part of the AI, right at the edge of the network without building these massive centralized data centers.
That explains the capital efficiency. Okay, but let's talk about the strategic neutrality angle. They signed this massive $85 million deal with a leading AI company. They didn't name them, but we can probably guess who it is. Why would that AI lab choose Cloudflare over, say, Microsoft, who is probably already funding them?
Because Microsoft is also a competitor. If you are a cutting-edge AI company, your single biggest existential threat is the company that's renting you your servers. Amazon has Bedrock and Anthropic. Google has Gemini. Microsoft has OpenAI. If you're anyone else, or even if you are one of their partners but you want some leverage, you need a Switzerland.
You don't want to store your secrets in your enemy's basement.
Precisely. Cloudflare has been very explicit. They're not building a foundational model. They are not trying to build the next GPT-6. They just want to be the pipes.
Yeah.
And that neutrality is becoming this huge strategic asset for companies that are terrified of vendor lock-in with a direct competitor.
It's the classic arms dealer strategy. It doesn't matter who wins the AI war as long as they all have to use your ammunition.
And your transport lines.
Okay, so that covers the infrastructure piece. But infrastructure is useless without apps. They spent a lot of time on the call talking about workers and this term vibe coding. I have to admit, vibe coding sounds like something a Gen Z marketing intern made up. Is this a real thing?
It does sound silly, but the concept behind it is actually pretty profound. Vibe coding is just a colloquial term for using natural language to build software. You tell an AI the vibe or the function you want, and it just writes the code for you.
But we've had no-code tools for years. What's different?
The deployment is the difference. In the past, if you used a no-code tool, you were kind of stuck in that tool's walled garden. With this new wave, the AI writes standard JavaScript or Python, but that code needs somewhere to run. And Cloudflare Workers is becoming the default destination because it's serverless and it's instant.
So the AI writes the code, dumps it into Cloudflare, and it's live across the globe in seconds.
Correct. They have 4.5 million developers on the platform now. But the really interesting technical piece here is something called MCP.
MCP, Model Context Protocol.
Yes.
You mentioned this in the context of a financial services customer. Break that down for me. What does MCP actually do?
Think of MCP as a universal adapter for AI agents. Right now, if you want ChatGPT to be able to read your bank balance and move money, the bank has to build a very specific API and give ChatGPT permission. It's clunky. MCP is a standard that lets an AI agent just read a system and automatically understand how to interact with it.
So it turns the bank's internal database into something the AI can just natively understand and manipulate.
Exactly that. The financial services customer they mentioned is using Cloudflare Workers to host an MCP server. And this allows agents, whether it's Claude, Gemini, or some custom internal bot, to securely connect to their internal data and execute really complex tasks like invoicing or payments.
That feels like the missing link for enterprise AI, moving from chatbots that can talk to agents that can actually do things.
And if Cloudflare owns the standard for how those agents connect to the data, they entrench themselves even deeper into the stack.
Which brings us to the other side of this whole equation. If these agents are doing all this work, reading all this data, who gets paid? This was what Prince called Act 4 of his presentation, saving the internet's business model.
Yeah, this is the most philosophical part of the whole deep dive, but it has very real financial teeth. The current web economy is built on a pretty simple exchange. I create content, you look at it, and I show you an ad.
Or I pay a subscription.
Or you pay a subscription.
Right.
But AI scrapers don't view ads, and they often bypass paywalls or they just summarize the content so the user never has to visit the original site. This is just slurping all the value out of the web.
We've seen this with all the publishers suing AI companies, but Cloudflare is saying they have a solution.
They want to be the broker in the middle. They launched this thing called AI crawl control. Because they sit in the middle of the traffic, they can see when a bot from Perplexity or OpenAI is hitting a site. They can block it, sure, but the real long-term play is to license that access.
So like a marketplace. You want to scrape my news site to train your model? Fine, pay me 1/10 of a cent per query. And Cloudflare just collects the toll.
That's it exactly. They mentioned a U.S. media company signing a $3.1 million deal just for this visibility and control. Even banks are signing up because they found out AI bots were scraping their proprietary equity research and basically giving it away for free.
That is fascinating. It turns Cloudflare into the tax collector of the AI internet.
Well, it's a necessary evolution.
Yeah.
If all the content creators go bankrupt, the AI has nothing new to learn from. Cloudflare is positioning itself as the only entity that's neutral enough and ubiquitous enough to manage that whole exchange.
Okay, I'm getting swept up in the narrative again. I need you to pull me back to reality. You mentioned earlier that not everything in the report was perfect. The stock is up, but there were some red flags in the CFO's commentary.
There are definite risks, for sure. Let's look at gross margins. They came in at 74.9%.
Which is just below their target range of 75–77%. Why the compression?
It's a mix of a few things. First, all that agentic traffic we were just talking about. It's high volume, but it's actually lower margin right now. They're processing massive amounts of data, which costs money and electricity and bandwidth.
So the big fish are expensive to feed.
A little bit.
Right.
Second, and this is more complex, is the revenue recognition from these pool of funds deals.
Pool of funds. Yeah, that sounds like an accounting nightmare.
It kind of is. In a traditional SaaS contract, you sell, say, 100 seats for $100 each. You know exactly how much revenue to recognize every single month. In a pool of funds deal, a customer commits, say, $50 million over 3 years to use any Cloudflare product they want.
So they might burn through $10 million in Q1 because they're doing a big migration, and then only $2 million in Q2.
Exactly. It makes the revenue very lumpy. It creates a lot of volatility in forecasting. The CFO was very transparent about this. It makes their job of predicting the next quarter much, much harder. For investors who want predictability, this adds a new layer of risk.
It also kind of masks the underlying trends. You don't know if a revenue spike is sustainable growth or just one customer burning through their prepaid pool.
Correct. And then there's the CapEx question. They're guiding for network CapEx to be 12–15% of revenue in 2026. That is ticking up. They're disciplined, for sure, but they're not immune to the laws of physics. They need more hardware to support all these AI workloads.
So margins are under pressure, forecasting is getting hazier, and they have to spend more on gear. That's the bear case right there.
That's the price of admission for playing in the big leagues. You can't be the connectivity cloud for the entire AI era on a shoestring budget.
So stepping back for a second, we have a company that's successfully pivoting to enterprise. They're riding this massive tailwind of machine-to-machine traffic, but they're also facing new complexities in how they manage their books and their margins.
I think Matthew Prince's Goldilocks analogy is apt, but I might frame it a little differently. They are in a race. They need to secure their position as the must-have infrastructure for AI before the hyperscalers figure out how to offer neutral-ish services or before the economics of the web just collapse entirely.
It really feels like they are building the railroad while the train is already barreling down the tracks.
And the train is being driven by a robot.
A robot that never sleeps.
Yeah.
One last thought here before we wrap. We've talked a lot about the shift from human eyeballs to bot requests. If the web really does become agentic, what happens to the visual web? Does the website, as we know it, HTML, CSS, pretty images, does that just become a niche product?
I think we're heading toward a bifurcation. The visual web will remain for entertainment, for leisure, basically, where humans hang out. But the transactional web buying insurance, booking travel, analyzing data, that becomes purely structured data, just API to API.
And in that world, the company that controls the API connections is the one that wins.
That is the bet Cloudflare is making.
Well, it is a terrifying and exhilarating prospect. We will definitely be watching to see if they can hit that $2.8 billion target in 2026. Thanks for diving up with us today. Let us know what you think. Are you ready for the agentic internet, or are you just hoping your favorite blog doesn't get blocked by a bot? We'll catch you next time.